Now, we're going to stay on stress tests now. Our next guest, Anne Cairns, has first-hand experience of dealing with collapsing banks. She's currently leading the European aspects of the restructuring of Lehman Brothers and is managing director of Alvarez and Marsal. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. There's been a lot of chat about these stress tests and just how rigorous they are going to be. From your perspective, what do you think they're really going to tell us?
Well, I think they're going to tell us a little bit about the bank's capital, but I don't think that's the important thing. I think the important thing is for the governments to be thinking now, what are they going to do after the results of these stress tests? How are they going to use the information to plan what to do about the banking systems in their countries? And more importantly, what are they going to do to stop some of their banks failing and to take action if any of their banks look as if they're going to fail?
Now, what we heard with Hippo, and we got those leaked results that their stress test, that they would fail the test, was that that Germany would step in and be able to recapitalise them. I mean, that really doesn't seem to have moved on much from where we were before in terms of bank bailouts being available to everybody. Do you think any of the banks would fail?
It's difficult to say what the results of the stress tests are going to be, but I do think that at this stage all of the regulators and all of the governments across Europe really understand where their banks are at this point in time. And I would say that they should be looking at their banks to say, have they got contingency plans in place, you could call them living wills, to be able to unwind themselves quickly in the event of imminent failure.
And from the way that, from your task and the way that you've looked at these things, do you suspect that most of the banks actually don't have all of these things in place?
I think that the banks have some contingency plans in place, and I think that some governments have emergency plans where they've looked at the banks inside their countries and decided which ones should merge, who should buy whom, etc. But I don't think that it's completely thought through. And the problem with a banking failure is different from other industries. One has to act incredibly quickly. And if a bank goes into free fall, you can lose a lot of money.
Indeed. You really need to know what you're going to do before it happens. That's the key, isn't it, to have all these measures in place first? That's
absolutely right. And it can be very complex with a bank that's in many jurisdictions because the insolvency rules are different in different geographies.
And that's been the problem with these stress tests before they've even come out. We're not exactly sure what's in them, and we're not sure what kind of exposure they're going to have, how much they're going to look at sovereign debt. Do you think that could be one of the big flaws of the stress test? Well,
I think that they're saying they're going to look at sovereign debt in different ways in different countries. We are going to see consolidated results for the banks. So we'll probably see a whole range of sovereign debt affecting a single bank. So I really come back to the point that regardless of what the stress tests say, what the governments and the bank should be planning is what to do next. I think the previous commentator said it's just the first of many tests.
So how useful do you think that they're going to be?
I think they're going to be a good first indicator, but they're really going to be statistics around the norm. You know, if the GDP goes down 3%, if sovereign debt defaults in double digits, etc. And I think, sorry, it's not default, but moves. But I think the other thing to say is that sometimes it's the outliers that actually cause the big issue rather than changes around a normal environment.
Indeed, and I was just going to ask you exactly that. I mean, what happens when there is a huge emergency? I mean, presumably that is something that also has to be looked at, and we saw that in the last financial crisis, and yet it's very difficult to test for that, isn't it?
I think it's difficult to test for it, but I think it's important to plan for it, and that's the real difference. You don't test for outliers, but you say, what will we do if this happens? And you know, you can learn a lot of lessons from bank failures about how to separate into good and bad banks, how to make sure you've got your people and your assets in the same legal vehicle, and what you're going to do within, 12, 24, 48 hours of having, a real crisis on your hands.
OK. Anne Cairns, thank you very much indeed. We're going to leave it there. Thank you.